Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com. In 1936, forest fires were seen as the greatest peril to future prosperity in Northern California. December 5, 1936, data compiled by State Forestry Department shows Santa Cruz County visited by flames almost yearly since the Big Fire of 1868, which ran over forested summits from watershed of the Pescadero to peaks of the Gavilons. The United States Forest Service shows that burn acreage in 1930 and 1931 was more than 50 million acres and has since dropped more than 80%. This corresponds well with the heat wave data from the National Climate Assessment, which shows that heat waves were much worse in the United States prior to 60 years ago, and particularly during the 1930s. In 1931, the Red Cross described the drought situation in the U.S. as being the worst disaster they'd ever faced. Because of the drought, people were starving in a number of different U.S. states. 3 years later, in 1934, there was a worldwide drought, and drought covered more than 80% of the United States. The 1999 version of NASA's U.S. temperature graph showed 1934 as being the hottest year and the 1930s being the hottest decade. In 1931, 93% of the United States reached 95 degrees Fahrenheit or 35 degrees Celsius sometime during the year. But over the past 90 years, the percentage of the United States which gets very hot has plummeted. The New York Times reported in 1938 that nearly 22 million acres burned in the United States the previous year, with one starting every 3 minutes. And they said that the very high burn acreage of 1937 was considerably under that of the previous year in 1936. This isn't surprising because according to the National Climate Assessment, 1936 had the worst heat waves by far in U.S. history. The fire season is pretty much over in the United States this year, and burn acreage was about half of the long-term average and down more than 80% from 90 years ago. But Politifact says that the high burn acreage of the 1920s and the 1930s never happened. They say federal officials have known for some time that their data was unreliable, and this year they took most of it off of their website. Many factors made the data shaky. Perhaps the most intriguing part of the story of bad data is that the government's old information includes millions of acres in the 1920s and 1930s that burned not by accident but by intent. On top of that, there was also double counting and, as some see it, undercounting. Earlier this year, the Biden administration erased all of the data prior to 1983 when burn acreage was much higher. According to Politifact, some of this burn acreage from 1930 and 1931 was counted twice, and there were some fires which didn't get counted at all. Which means that there should have been some sort of error bar put on the data. It might have actually been higher, and it might have actually been lower. Legitimate scientists don't hide the data or alter it, they put error bars on it to show uncertainty. This year's burn acreage is down more than 80%. Unless the data was overcounted by a factor of 5, there was more burn acreage in the 1930s than there was this year. All datasets contain error, but there's no way the Biden administration can justify hiding the very high burn acreage of the 1930s. Politifact's claim that there's more burn acreage now than there was during the 1920s and the 1930s is simply not credible. And Politifact didn't even get their numbers right. They say there was more than 40 million acres burned in 1930 when the actual number was more than 50. It appears that they didn't even bother to look at the datasets which they're canceling. But here's the most ridiculous part of Politifact's argument. They say that some of the burn acreage from the 1920s and 1930s shouldn't have been counted because it was started by humans. That's exactly the same story as now. According to the National Park Service, nearly 85% of wildland fires in the United States are caused by humans. And according to the governor, more than 90% of California fires are started by people.
New active fires that have come up over the course of the weekend, the El Dorado, getting a lot of attention because it's a reminder that the vast majority of fires that we experience on an annual basis come from individuals making bad decisions or by simple neglect and accident, meaning 90 plus percent of the fires that we experience in the state of California on an annual basis are man-made fires.
None of the Politifact arguments hold any water. Based on their own arguments, they should have erased 85 to 90% of the burn acreage from the past 2 years. And here's one more fraud from the Biden administration which Politifact is covering up. This document resided on the National Interagency Fire Center website until just a few months ago. It was put together 20 years ago by the Department of the Interior, Department of Agriculture, Department of Commerce, EPA, FEMA, and several other agencies. The document said, historically fire has been a frequent and major ecological factor in North America, in the conterminous United States, during the pre-industrial period from 1500 to 1800, an average of 145 million acres burned annually. According to the National Interagency Fire Center, this year burn acreage is less than 7 million acres, so it's down 95% from the pre-industrial period. Burn acreage has massively decreased in the United States as the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has increased. Politifact's fact-checking is patently false, and they're simply covering up fraud from the Biden administration. During the 1930s, we built the Golden Gate Bridge and we split the atom. The suggestion from climate alarmists that we didn't know how to count fires and we didn't know how to measure temperatures during the 1930s is patently absurd. Toto has been pulling back the curtain on scamsters like Politifact and the Biden administration for the past 13 years. You can visit him, Kyrie, and Caesar on the web at realclimatescience.com.